The morning the world ended, Jang Hoon was on a train, counting the days left in his paycheck.
Then the train was gone, the city was gone, and he was standing in grass that ran all the way to the edge of the sky. No sound, no city noise, no hum of engines or distant voices. Only wind moving through grass, and the grass going on in every direction with nothing to stop it. A voice with no warmth told him what had happened, and it told all 8.4 billion of them at once.
Every human alive had been moved to a place the system called Grassland World for a survival migration.
Each person had been given one water source and one life. The water source was the whole game. Food, drinking water, tools, shelter, trade, all of it came out of whatever water the system had dropped at your feet. Ranking lists opened, regional chats opened, a global market channel opened.
Then the system left with one warning before it went quiet.
The starter pack would not last. The grassland night would not wait. And not everything that took the hook would be a fish.
Each survivor had been given 1,000 acres of land. So wide, Jang Hoon could not see where his ended in any direction.
The nearest neighbor was somewhere past the horizon, too far to walk to and too far to see. For the first days, the only place any of them existed to each other was the chat.
And the chat was already loud with what everyone had found at the center of their land. Most people found a lake, wide, clean water with fish breaking the surface, boats tied at the shore, nets folded and waiting. Someone posted an image of a lake that ran all the way to the horizon.
Jang Hoon walked to the center of his land and found a puddle.
It sat behind a broken patch of grass, brown, no wider than he was tall. A skin of mud on top, a sour, stagnant smell coming off it. When he crouched and looked in, he could see exactly what he had to work with. A few mud worms turning in the silt, some shrimp smaller than his smallest fingernail. No fish, no clean water, barely room to swing a line before the hook found the far bank. The ranking list counted every survivor alive, from best source to worst. The number next to his name read rank 8.4 billion. Dead last. Out of everyone alive. He was 20 years old. The regional chat found him about 10 seconds later. He would spare the details. Most of them used the word puddle. At least one came with a drawing. He looked at the number once, then he put it down. The rank was a fact, and staring at a fact does not change it, and it does not catch fish. The lake owners could spend the first day bragging about their boats and chat.
He had a more pressing problem, which was that the sun was already past noon, and the night would not wait. He stopped reading chat, knelt in the dirt, and looked at the worst fishing rod ever made. The starter pack was the same for all of them, whether the system had handed you a sea or a hole in the ground.
2 pieces of bread, 2 bottles of fresh water, 3 lumps of gray bait, 1 rod from the gacha.
And the gacha hated him.
The line was thin enough to snap if he looked at it wrong. The hook came out of the wrapper, already bent. The point twisted off so it would skate across a fish's mouth instead of setting. Counting was the one skill he had carried over from the old world. 3 years of stretching a paycheck across a month, skipping lunch so the rent cleared. Learning down to the coin what he could spend and what he had to keep.
None of that had changed.
Out here, a bottle of water was a day of life he would have to pay for, and he did not have many.
The bent hook he could fix. He snapped a thorn off the dead grass and worked the point straight, slow,
so the cheap metal did not shear off in his hand. When the barb sat true, he pinched 1/3 of one bait lump onto it. 1/3, not the whole thing.
A man who burns his whole supply on the first cast deserves whatever the day does to him after.
Somewhere past the horizon, the chat was full of people hauling in their first fish, calling out catch counts, comparing hauls. He muted most of it, dropped his crooked hook into the brown water, and waited. The line twitched. He pulled, and a mud shrimp came up, gray and ugly and the size of his thumb, kicking on the barb.
Worthless on any market. He had his hand half open to throw it back.
Then a pane of pale blue light opened in the air, a hand's width from his face.
A voice colder than the welcome read one line into the quiet.
Deep hook system awakened.
He went still. In the chat, people had spent the last hour posting their own unlocks and talents in source readings. Not one of them had sounded like this.
The light kept writing. Water source identified. Classification, baby depth spring. Then a second line, smaller under the first.
A depth spring does not grow wider. It grows deeper.
Every catch pulled from it deepens the source. The deeper the source, the rarer what answers the hook.
In every channel, 8 billion people were measuring their luck by how much surface water they had been handed.
The system had just told him, where nobody else could hear, that the size on the surface was the part that did not matter.
The lakes were wide and shallow. Wide and shallow runs out.
His grew the other direction, down. And down was where it was keeping everything worth having.
A third box opened under the second. Talent unlocked. Catch forecast.
The water blurred, and for half a breath he saw 3 shapes laid over it that were not there.
Each one carrying a feeling he could not have put into words.
A cluster of mud shrimp near the top. Easy. Worth almost nothing. A bitter oilfish a little lower. More food, more work to land. And deeper, coiled where the brown went black, something long with a low hum coming off it, and a warning he felt in his teeth before he understood it.
The forecast showed him the next few things he could pull up and roughly what each would cost him to land.
It did not choose for him. That was the whole point of it. Every cast was a decision now, instead of a gamble. He could fish the safe shrimp all day and starve slowly, or he could go down after the thing with the hum.
He started with the oilfish because he was not going to reach for the most dangerous thing in the water before he could even stand up.
It fought, sour and slow, and came up bitter. Too bitter to enjoy, but it was food.
The skin and the small sack of oil inside it were material he could use or sell.
He cleaned it on a flat stone, set the meat aside, and kept the oil.
He caught 2 more shrimp after that, and on the second one, he felt the puddle change beneath his knees.
A small drop somewhere below the surface. The floor of it going down a finger's width.
Earned, not given.
The system meant exactly what it said. Every catch took the spring a little deeper.
He sat there with a dead shrimp in his hand and understood something the 8 billion people bragging in chat did not.
They had been handed the whole size of their luck on the first day.
The entire lake spread out in front of them to spend down.
He had been handed a hole that paid him back a little more every time he risked something for it. One of those dry. The other one does not, as long as you keep going down.
He had a feeling that mattered more than anything in his starter pack. By the time the sun had moved off noon, the lake market channel was open and loud.
Most of it, lake owners dumping fish in bulk. The price of a common trout already sliding as 10,000 people tried to sell the same thing.
He did not have fish to sell. He had ugly material, which turned out to be the one corner of the market nobody with a lake had bothered to learn.
He sold the oilfish skin, the sack of oil, and a handful of shell scraps to a crafter who needed grease for a lamp.
The coins were almost nothing.
He turned them straight around for a bundle of dry grass and a length of rough rope.
Because grass and rope were what a shelter was made of, and he would rather hold the makings of a wall than coins he could not eat. Then he baited the hook again and went down after the thing with the hum.
The forecast sharpened the moment he committed to it.
The hum taking on a name, black mud eel. The warning under it was not subtle. Danger, high. Reward, better than anything you have touched.
He tied the rope from his waist to the only solid thing within reach, a half-buried rock at the puddle's edge.
He knotted it 3 times and pulled it twice to be sure. An eel that can drag will drag. It hit the bait hard enough to bend the rod double. For a long second, he was sure the line was gone and the eel with it. The thin line sang and held. By some miracle,
the gacha did not deserve. He gave ground when it pulled and took it back when it tired. The eel came up out of the brown thrashing, longer than his arm. Black, slick, far stronger than a thing that size had any right to be. It threw a loop of itself over his wrist and bit down, and the pain ran white all the way to his elbow. He had never been in a fight in his life.
He had ducked one drunk on a train platform once and called it a close call.
So he did not try to wrestle it, because the eel was better at being an eel than he would ever be at fighting one. What he had was the rock and a reed he had sharpened to a point while the oilfish cooked. He let the eel pull toward the stone, let it think it was getting free, and in the half-second its head pinned against the rock, he got his weight over it and drove the reed in behind its skull. He leaned until the thrashing stopped. It shuddered once and went still. His hand was bleeding through 3 fingers and would not stop shaking. He sat back in the mud and breathed until it did, because there was nobody coming across 1,000 acres to do it for him.
The lute opened over the body one line at a time, and he felt each one land.
Eel meat, a good amount. A small monster core worn through the light that held it. A fragment of depth stone. A pouch of eel oil. Strips of tough hide. The core was the prize. When he closed his hand around it, the system asked whether he wanted to feed it to the source. He did. The puddle dropped open beneath the surface. Not wider, deeper. A real step this time. The black at the bottom going blacker. The hide he wrapped around his bitten hand and tied off with a strip of itself, and the pressure slowed the bleeding to nothing. The meat he kept. The oilfish had already taught him what careful hunger tasted like, and he was not going to eat his best food cold and raw on the first day, if he could help it. That was the first thing the grassland taught him, and it taught him through the hand. Danger was not a thing to run from out here. Danger was inventory. The shrimp were free and worthless. The thing that bit him had paid for a day of food, a step of depth, and the wrap keeping his hand from going bad. Every cast after that, he would be choosing which danger he could afford. The forecast had been showing him something under the eel the whole time. Lower, with hard, square edges, no fish has. He cast for it, and the system named it before it broke the surface. Wooden blueprint chest. Guarded. The guard was a chest crab, pale and hard-shelled, the size of 2 fists, planted on the lid. He did not have a weapon worth a name. What he had was the reed, the rope, and the knowledge that a crab thinks with its claws, and nothing else above them.
He dangled a scrap of eel meat off to one side.
When both claws snapped shut on it, he flipped the crab onto its back with the reed and held it there until it went still. A little crab meat, the shell, which he kept, and the chest inside was a blueprint rolled tight and glowing faint. Small tent. He learned the next rule of this world, the only way he ever learned anything, by needing it. You could not just build out here. The system would not let his hands put together a real shelter without the blueprint to read from. The small tent wanted grass bundles, fish skin rope, and wood stakes. The dry grass he had bought, the rope, a handful of stakes he cut and sharpened from the dead stalks behind the puddle. He fed it all in and watched the tent take shape in front of him, low, ugly, and his. The first thing in this whole world with walls. The sky was bruising toward evening by the time he tied the last corner down, and the cold was already starting to come up out of the ground. The system had warned all of them in the welcome that the first night would come for anyone without shelter, fire, and clean water. And it did not sound like the kind of system that bluffed. He had a shelter, 2 bottles of water, and an eel's worth of meat. What he did not have was fire or any way to make the brown water safe to drink. So he was 2/3 of the way to surviving his own first night, which for a man ranked dead last out of every human alive, was further than the chat would have bet on him. He sat in the mouth of the tent as the light went orange and took stock the way he always did when a month was running short. 2 bottles of clean water, a whole puddle of brown he could not drink, eel meat, raw bread,
a rod, a rope, a thorn, a pile of shell.
It was not much.
But he had walked into the old world at the end of every month with thinner margins than this and made it to the next paycheck.
The only thing that had really changed was that the rent out here was paid in nights survived.
He could count nights. Counting was the thing he was good at.
Then the scammer found him, because the worst people in any new world go to work faster than the good ones.
He came in through the market channel, friendly. And the friendly ones are always the ones to watch. A private message, his name spelled right, a little too much warmth packed into it.
The man had seen he was new. He said he hated to watch a solo owner go under on the first night.
As it happened, he had a spare blueprint, a rare one, a deep water lure that would let even a small source pull premium fish.
Because he liked the look of him, he would let it go cheap. All his coins and the eel meat. A steal, he said. A year ago, some version of Jang Hun might have wanted to believe a stranger was being kind.
3 years of counting other people's generosity had cured him of that.
Generosity with a price on it is not generosity. It is a sale.
And the harder a man works to make you feel chosen, the tighter you should hold what is yours.
So he asked the man to list the blueprint on the open market instead, just to keep it clean.
The man had a reason that was not a reason. Then he asked for the item's trade record, because every item in this world carried one, a chain of where it had been and what it really was. He had a reason for that too, softer this time, and then his voice went hard.
When the soft did not work, he went loud.
He took the whole thing to the regional chat and turned the story inside out so fast it would have impressed Jang Hun if it had not been aimed at his throat. Now, the puddle owner was the problem, hoarding his catch while better people struggled, too proud and too selfish to share with a region that was, in this man's telling, counting on him. The chat began to turn, a few voices agreeing that the worm farmer should share, asking who rank 8 billion thought he was.
He pulled the trade record on the blueprint himself and posted it where the noise was loudest.
The system does not lie about where a thing came from.
The record showed the rare deep water lure for exactly what it was, a common starter blueprint, copied and dressed up.
Its real origin stamped at the bottom of the chain, the forged value sitting on a worthless base for anyone to read. He did not add anything to it. He did not need to. He let the record sit under a speech about generosity. And the same crowd that had been ready to shame him read the proof and turned on the scammer instead.
Because a crowd will always rather laugh at a caught liar than look at itself.
The man went quiet. Then he went offline.
A while later, the system noted, with no feeling in it at all, that his source had been claimed by someone else while he was busy.
He did not feel exactly good about that. A claimed source on the first day meant a person out on the grass with nothing left and a cold night coming.
But the man had tried to take his food by convincing a whole region he was the thief.
And Jang Hun had spent too many years being the one who paid for other people's stories to lose sleep over a man who picked the wrong target.
He came out of the whole thing richer than he went in, and not only in coins.
2 strangers who had watched it happen sent him messages, not to mock him, but to trade. Real offers from people who had decided the puddle boy could at least read a contract.
One of them was about to matter more than either of them knew.
Her handle on the market channel was plain. No boast anywhere in it, which was its own kind of signal in a place where everyone was inflating themselves by the hour.
Quan Sohi.
She did not open with sympathy. She opened with a correction. His bait was wrong, she said. Not bad luck. Wrong. He was dropping gray starter paste into a death spring and wondering why only the cheapest things came up to meet it.
She knew bait, the whole of it.
What grass worm and shrimp smell and fish oil did when you ground them together in the right amounts. What each mix called up out of the water and what it left down there. She was not offering charity. She wanted clean materials in return, and she stayed wary through the whole exchange.
Careful in a way that told him someone had already tried to cheat her once that day, and she was not going to allow a second.
He could have haggled.
he did not, because she was right. And because a person who leads with the truth, when a lie would have sold better, is worth more than the few coins haggling would save. He sent her shell scraps and a measure of eel oil, and he sent fair weight, a little more than the recipe was strictly worth. Because the cheapest thing a man can buy is someone's willingness to trade with him twice.
She sent back the recipe for a paste that smelled faintly and horribly of wounded mud shrimp.
The kind of smell that makes a bigger thing think it has found an easy meal. He mixed it, baited the crooked hook, and cast where the forecast showed a hard, square edge sitting just under the water. The bait worked on the first pull exactly as she had set it with. The line going heavy with intent. Another chest came up out of the dark. This one bound in a knot of crab legs. And the moment it broke the surface, the cold arrived. Not the slow cold of evening that had been creeping up since he built the tent. This was a drop, fast and hard. The warmth pulled out of the air all at once. A warning opened across the whole region in pale letters that every survivor on every plot would be reading at the same second he was. First cold rainstorm incoming. Exposed survivors will not last the night. He turned the chest over in his hands. Through the wet shell, he could already make out the shape of the word on the blueprint folded inside. And of everything the system could have handed him one breath before a freezing storm, it had handed him the one thing he needed most. Bonfire. The first night of the new world was coming down on 1,000 acres of open grass. And for the first time since he read the number next to his name, he was almost ready for it. He killed the second crab patiently, the same method that had worked on the first, because he was not about to throw out a working method just to feel brave and lose fingers proving it. Then he had the chest open and the blueprint in his hands. Bonfire, dry grass, stones, fish oil, a spark stone. He had been saving dry grass since the first hour, hoarding it against exactly the cold that was now coming down out of the sky. He had eel oil in a pouch, stones at the puddle's rim, a spark stone buried at the bottom of the starter kit. He built the fire fast, with the rain already starting to spit, and he fed it the eel oil to make it catch in the wet. The first warmth of the new world hit him at the same moment the first hard rain did. He sat in the mouth of his ugly tent, with a fire in front of him, and let himself believe for about 10 seconds that he might live through the night. Then he got back to work, because 10 seconds is all that kind of feeling is worth. The rain came down exactly as the system had promised, hard, cold, and steady. And through the chat, he could hear it doing worse than that to people who had spent the first day bragging instead of building. A wide, clean lake is a beautiful thing, right up until a freezing rain is falling on it with no walls and no fire, and a long open shore for the cold to come at you from every side. The bragging in the channel stopped within the hour. What replaced it was people understanding, all at once and far too late, that a water source is not a house. He had a house, more or less. The tent held, the fire held, banked low under the overhang where the rain could not drown it. And the rain itself, which was killing people out on the open plots, he turned into the one thing his puddle could not give him. He strung spare tent cloth to catch the runoff and funneled it down into his empty bottles, then into the cracked pot he had traded for, because clean water falling out of the sky for free was not something he was going to let run off into the mud. By the time the worst of the night had passed, he had more clean water than he had started the day with, and he had not had to drink a mouthful of the brown. He dried the crab shell at the fire until it went hard, turning it so it cured even. He did not sleep much. He had no business sleeping on the first night of a world that had already told him it meant to kill him. The rain found every gap it could. Twice the wind drove it under the overhang and nearly took the fire. And twice he shielded the flame with his own body in the tent cloth and coaxed it back, because letting it die meant starting the whole fight over with wet hands in a colder night. Out in the channels he could hear the night doing its work. The loud voices thinned one after another. A few of them asking the open chat for help that nobody out on the open grass was in any position to give. He did not answer.
There was nothing he could send across 1,000 acres in a freezing rain.
And if he burned himself out trying to save people he could not reach, he would only add his own name to the lost.
So he fed the fire, and he watched the water climb at the puddle's edge, and he counted what he had against what the morning was going to ask of him.
By the time the worst of it passed, he was still cold, still tired, and still alive, which was 3 more than a lot of people with bigger water could say.
The market told him what the storm was worth before the storm was even over.
Fire was the whole game now. Every channel was full of people who would have laughed at a bonfire blueprint the day before.
He had the blueprint. He did not sell many copies.
He was not about to flood the market with the only thing keeping him special, since he had already watched the price of common fish fall through the floor because 8 billion people all had the same thing to sell. He sold a few copies at high price. Then he stopped, and he sold the rest in pieces instead.
Fire starting packets, a measure of eel oil that would make wet grass catch. Plain advice on how to keep a flame alive in a downpour, which most of them needed more than any blueprint.
And he took goods for it, not coins, because in the middle of a storm, a cracked pot is worth more than currency you cannot spend until the rain stops.
By the time the sky started to gray, he had turned a single fire into a real pile of things he had not owned the day before.
A sack of charcoal, the cracked pot, a leaking bucket he could patch, a bundle of weed fiber, shells.
Every piece of it a tool or the start of one. All of it bought with warmth he can make again tomorrow for nothing.
One trade stuck with him.
A lake owner 3 plots over, soaked and shaking so hard it came through in his messages, broken and half-spelled, offered a whole crate of fresh fish for a single fire packet and the advice to go with it.
A day earlier, that crate would have been a fortune. That night, it was nothing, because everyone had fish, and the price had already drowned.
He did not take the crate. He took the man's spare bucket and a coil of good rope instead, things he could actually use.
And he sent him the packet and told him plainly how to bank a fire so the rain could not reach it. The man lived. He thanked him 2 days later after he had stopped shaking. He did not need the thanks, but he marked him down as someone who had paid fair and remembered a kindness.
And out here, that is worth keeping track of.
He was still ranked dead last. The list had not moved a single place.
But he had started the storm with a tent and an eel, and ended it with the makings of a workshop. The people still laughing at the worm farmer were the same people who had spent that night losing everything they had bragged about.
The puddle had been drinking the storm too.
All that rain, all that runoff, all the cores and catches he had fed it the day before. Somewhere in the gray of the morning, the water at his feet crossed the line it had been climbing toward. It rose and darkened, and the mud thinned, and the floor of it dropped, and the system wrote a new name over it in pale light.
Muddy puddle upgraded. Small mud pond.
It was still not a lake. Next to the things people had bragged about in chat, it was still a joke. But it was a deeper joke than it had been. And the moment it settled into its new shape, something in him settled with it. A sense he had not before. The system named it as it woke. Depth sense. He could feel into the water now, instead of guessing at it. Where catch forecast told him what might bite before he cast, depth sense let him reach down into what was already there. The shape of the bottom, the things resting on it, the places where it was soft. The first time he used it on purpose, he knelt at the rim and pushed the sense down into the dark.
And the pond opened up in his head without his eyes doing any of the work.
He could feel the new floor the upgrade had dropped, the cold pockets where the water went deep, the slow shapes resting on the bottom.
It was not sight, and it was not guessing. It was knowing.
The same certain knowing he had about the coins in his own pocket.
And down on that new layer, the sense found a fish with a broad, flat shell across its back. And pinned in the mud beneath that shell, square-edged, another blueprint. The sense gave him one more thing besides, and it would keep giving him that thing from then on. It showed him the weak place, not the armored back, the soft seam underneath,
where the shell met the body, the one spot a spear could go in.
He did not rush it.
He had a fire, a tent, food, and a storm still doing his fishing pressure for him.
So he spent the gray morning making himself harder to hurt before he went after something armored on every side.
The hard crab shell he had cured at the fire became guards lashed up above his forearms with the weed fiber he had traded for.
The eel hide made wraps for his hands that gave him grip on a wet line and a wet spear.
And he cut a longer, heavier reed and worked the end of it to a point, a spear he could put his whole weight behind.
Then he mixed a batch of Sohi's paste, the wounded shrimp smell she had sent, because a shell-backed fish that size was slow and stubborn and exactly the kind of thing that smell was built to call out of the dark.
It came up slow, the shell breaking the surface first. Broad, flat, and streaming mud.
He hooked it on the crooked gacha rod, which was barely enough to turn it.
His first lunge with the spear glanced off the plates and nearly cost him the weapon, and the fish slammed sideways hard enough to jerk him off balance into the shallows.
He caught himself on the rim and backed off.
Trying to force it was the eel all over again, the same mistake he had bled 3 fingers to learn.
And he was not going to learn it twice.
So he let it heave, roll, and tire itself on the line. He waited.
A thing with armor like that has to open somewhere to move.
When it humped its back to turn, the seam showed exactly where the sense had said it would. The soft line under the shell where it met the body. He drove the spear up into that seam and put every bit of weight he had down onto it, and held it there until it stopped moving.
No wrestling, no heroics, the weak place and patience.
Which were turning out to be the only kind of strength a man like him was ever going to get out here.
The loot rose off one line at a time. The water filter blueprint. The thing he had spent the whole day needing. A stack of shell plates, heavier and better than the crab shell, straight onto his pile of armor materials.
A handful of fine lake sand, a small clear pebble the system marked as valuable and did not explain, and late coins, the most money he had held at one time since the world began.
He sat back on his heels in the mud, soaked through, arms shaking again. And for the second time in 2 days, he had taken something dangerous and turned it into exactly what he needed next. He was starting to understand the shape of how a man wins out here without ever being the strongest thing in the water. Before he touched the filter, he dealt with the food, because a hungry man makes poor trades.
He built a low rack of green reed over the edge of the fire and smoked the eel strips slow through the gray morning, turning them, letting the heat and the smoke do what the cold could not, and make the meat last.
It filled the cap with a smell that was almost good, the first almost good thing the grassland had given him.
And it left him with something better than a meal. It left him with stock. Dried, smoked, keeping food, in a world where most people were eating their catch the same day they pulled it because they had no way to hold it.
They were rich in the moment and poor by morning, starting over with every sunrise. He had just bought himself a long stretch of never being the hungry one.
The water filter wanted lake sand, shells, grass cloth, and charcoal, and he had every piece of it now.
He built it under the lip of the tent, out of the rain, and he poured the brown water of his own pond through it.
What came out the bottom ran clear.
He cupped it in his hands and drank. And after 2 days of rationing, that was the best thing he had tasted since the train. And that was when the second thing this world had to teach him finally landed. Everyone was selling fish. 8 billion people with lakes, all dumping the same trout into the same market. All racing each other down to nothing on price. Because when everybody has the identical thing, the thing is worth identical to nothing. And not one of them was selling wire. They all had water, oceans of it. So it never once crossed their minds that clean, filtered, safe-to-drink water might be the thing people could not get the moment a cold storm churned every open source to mud and sickness. Fish was food. Water was life. And life, it turns out, sells higher than food. Nobody had built a thing to sell water,
because nobody had ever had to think of water as something you could run out of.
He had thought about running out of everything his whole life. It was the one subject he had a head start in.
So he stayed out of the fish war entirely.
He sold filtered water in small clay pot measures, and he bundled it with strips of smoked eel, survival in a single trade.
He priced it fair, but never cheap.
And the thing that made it work, the thing that kept it working, was that when buyers ran a scan over him to size up who they were dealing with, his catch appraisal lied for them. It masked the real depth of his pond. It hid how much he was actually pulling up and how fast.
It kept his climb off the public read entirely.
To every scan that reached him, he was still rank 8 billion, still the worm farmer, a dead last puddle owner who had gotten lucky with a fire blueprint.
Nobody guards what is theirs against the man they are busy laughing at.
His first real water sale taught him how right he was.
A lake owner 2 regions out sent for a single measure almost as a joke,
Half expecting the worm farmer's water to be the poison the chat kept calling it.
He sent it clean,
An hour later, the message came back changed. No joke left in it.
asking how much he had and what he wanted for a standing order, because the man's own lake had gone foul in the storm, and every scan he ran on it came back worse by the hour.
He named a fair price and a steady one, and he had his first regular buyer before the mud on the grass had even dried.
After that, they came faster than he could have hoped, and he never once had to chase the fish price down into the dirt to find them.
That was when the man with the biggest lake in the region decided to come down and step on him himself.
His name was Kang Teao, and he made very sure everyone knew it.
His source was not a lake so much as a small sea. Docks running out across the water, nets, a whole crew of other survivors working it for him, storage sheds going up along the shore. He controlled the price of common fish for the entire region because he could outsupply anyone alive.
And he had noticed the worm farmer making noise in his market and decided to put a stop to it.
He mocked first in chat for the crowd.
Called the puddle territory a stain on the region, and the puddle water a sickness waiting to happen.
Picking the cursed water story back up where the scammer had dropped it. And then he flooded the channel with so much cheap common fish that the price fell straight through the floor, trying to drown the small trade under the sheer weight of his supply.
It did not touch him. He could not have known why, because his scan still read the same worm farmer everyone else's did.
But the reason was simple. He was not selling fish. He was selling fire and clean water and dried food. And you cannot crash the price of a thing by flooding the market with a completely different thing.
Teao worked that out a few hours too late.
Jang Hoon filed his name away beside the eel in the storm, another danger with a cost and a payout attached to it. He did not know the size of it yet, but Teao had built his whole power on being the biggest, and he was not going to take being outmaneuvered well. The morning the market started to prove there were things Teao could not outsupply, so he was already reading his catches off the market and working out what his pond was growing into.
She was the only person in the region who had looked at the worm farmer's trades and seen the truth underneath them.
That there was nothing lucky about any of it. She did not say so out loud. She started treating him as a partner worth keeping instead of a mark worth a single sale. And he started sending her clean materials and fair weight in return. A thing that had begun as one cautious trade settled into something steadier.
Out here, that mattered. A man alone on 1,000 acres needs exactly one person he can deal with straight.
She was turning out to be his.
The storm broke near the end of the day, the rain thinning to nothing, and the gray pulling back off the grass.
He went down for one more cast before the light went.
The forecast showed him a weed fish in the new lair, all teeth and temper.
It fought him dirty, biting the line and spinning the hook 3 separate times before he finally landed it.
When it came up, it was already dying.
And as it died, it coughed something up into the mud at the pond's edge. A scrap of blueprint, torn. Only a piece. Only a corner of the design.
Drying rack.
He felt the rest of it pull at him from somewhere lower, from down in the dark, where the water had gone deepest.
He looked into the pond, down through the clear his filter had not even touched yet.
And at the very bottom, where the storm had stirred something loose, there was a ring.
A circle of black set into the floor of his own pond, darker than the water around it, with a cold coming up out of it that the fire at his back could not reach.
The weed fish gave one last kick, slid out of his hands, and dove straight down through that black ring, taking the rest of itself into the dark.
He sat on the rim of the small mud pond, with a fragment of a blueprint in his hand, and a hole in the bottom of his own water that had not been there an hour before.
The system had spent 2 days teaching him the same lesson over and over, through the eel and the shell-backed fish and the storm. Everything worth having down here was guarded, and everything guarded paid out for the man patient enough to find the soft place and wait.
He had a fire now, clean water, smoked food, a rival who had already underestimated him once, and a torn blueprint pulling him toward a hole in the dark.
The puddle was not finished opening. It had only just started.
And in the morning, he was going down to see how far. He went down for the weed fish first thing, because a hole in the bottom of his pond would still be there at noon, and a torn blueprint would not finish itself.
He had slept maybe 3 hours with the black ring at the bottom of his pond pulling at the back of his mind the whole time.
The weed fish in the new layer were fast and mean, and they bit for the joy of biting.
The third one he hooked clean through the side of the jaw, and he did not give it a finger of slack the whole way up.
And when it landed, it brought the rest of what he needed with it. The torn drying rack fragment in his pack pulled toward the new piece the moment they were close, and the 2 halves of the blueprint became one.
Drying rack, reed frame, fish skin cord, charcoal bed. He built it tall, 3 levels of frame lashed with fish skin cord over a bed of charcoal he had traded for.
And once it was up, he went to work on everything he had been saving.
The rest of the eel, the crab meat, the shell-backed fish, which was a lot of meat once you got past the armor. He cut it into strips and laid it across the frame and smoked it low and slow through the morning.
By the time the sun was high, he had something almost nobody else in the region had. Food that kept. That is a small, flat sentence that means nothing until you understand what everyone else was doing. 8 billion people pulling fish out of the water and eating it the same day, because a fish left out goes bad, and a lake gives you no way to hold what it gives you. He counted the hoard in days, because days are the only unit that had ever made sense to him. That number, days of food in hand, was the first real cushion he had owned since the train. And with a cushion behind him, he could make different choices than he had ever made, one bad day from nothing.
He had spent his whole life scraping along with nothing in reserve.
Out here, he was quietly building the reserve first.
So she reached him through the market while the smoke was still going.
So she had a recipe she thought he would want: grasshopper bait, dryland bait,
Ground grasshopper and grass oil. Not for the shallow, ugly things he had been pulling, but for the faster, smarter fish that lived in deeper, cleaner water.
She had worked out what his pond was becoming before he told her a thing about it. Just from reading his trades, she was right again.
She wanted clean water for the recipe, a standing measure. And she wanted something he had not expected: shelter.
Her own plot caught the rain badly, she said plainly. No shame in it, and the cold storms were costing her. She wanted to know how he had kept a fire alive through the worst night the grassland had thrown so far.
He sent her the water, and he sent more than the recipe was worth.
Then he sent her the Resker free.
How to bank a fire under an overhang so the rain could not reach it. How to string cloth to catch the runoff. The tent design, the real one, the same shelter that had kept him alive.
She had been straight with him since her first message, when a cricket word would have made her more. A person like that does not get charged for shelter by him.
He tried the grasshopper bait that same hour, casting it into the cleaner water near the surface where faster fish had started to show since the upgrade. It pulled up a long, silver fish he had not seen before. Quick, clean, worth real coin.
Nothing like the mud-bound, ugly things the gray starter paste had been bringing.
She had been right about that too.
Every recipe she sent reached a little deeper or a little cleaner than the last.
She was guiding his pond up one run at a time from a plot she had never set foot on.
And the longer they traded, the more he understood that bait was not a small skill.
In a world where the water decided everything, the person who knew what to drop into it was worth more than most people with lakes.
With food stored and the grasshopper bait in hand, he finally did the thing the black ring had been waiting on. He had been holding his lake coins, all of them, because he had a feeling the pond was close to another step.
And he wanted to push it over the edge on his own terms, instead of waiting for the slow drip of catches to do it.
The system had taught him how upgrades worked by now.
You could let a source climb on its own, one catch at a time, or you could force it, feed it coins and the right materials all at once, and make the jump happen when you chose.
He ground the deathstone fragments into powder, gathered the shells and the fish oil, counted out the coins, and fed the whole lot into the pond together. The water answered. It pulled down and cleared, the last of the mud thinning out of it until he could see straight to the bottom. And the system wrote the new name in pale light.
Small mud pond, upgraded. Clear pond.
For the first time, he could kneel at the rim and see his own water all the way down. Clear, cold, deep.
The brown, sour puddle of the first day gone entirely. It did not look like much to anyone scanning from 1,000 acres away, and the chat still had him dead last. But he knew what he was looking at now.
Not a small pond, a deep one, getting deeper, with a hole in whatever the system was hiding stacked underneath it, waiting to be earned. And the black ring at the bottom, the cold, dark circle the weedfish had dived through, changed with the upgrade.
It had been a hole before, a drop into nothing.
Now it had settled and steadied and opened into something the system was willing to name. A stairway of dark going down, with a way in, and more important to him, a way back.
Level 1 puddle dungeon unlocked.
A dungeon could trap a survivor below if his lifeline failed or his light went out. People had already died in the early ones, gone down and never come up.
He was not going to be one of them. But he was also not going to leave a stocked dungeon under his own pond unopened.
Not when everything this world had built so far had paid out for the man patient enough to go in carefully.
So he went in carefully.
He roped his waist to the buried rock at the rim, let the line out slow as he lowered himself into the ring.
He took the sealed flame in a fresh skin of lamp oil because the dungeon had no light of its own. Shell guards up both arms, reed spear across his back, Sohi's grasshopper bait in the crooked rod. The drop went further than he expected. The light of his own pond shrank to a pale coin above him as he lowered himself.
The water turned from the clean cold of the clear pond to something older and heavier the deeper he went. Halfway down, he made himself stop, breathe, check his line.
Because the thing that kills a man in a place like this is not the monster at the bottom, it is panic. Going too fast, burning his oil, losing his count. Looking up one moment to find the way back to the sun has gone blank in his head.
So he went slow, he checked the rope, he counted.
And when his feet finally found something solid, he stood still in the dark, with his hand on the line, and let himself be sure of the way back before he let himself care about the way forward.
The first layer of the dungeon was a drowned room of mud and root.
The walls were packed dark earth, and through them ran roots that gave off a faint, cold light of their own. Enough to see by once his eyes adjusted. Pale, steady, wrong somehow because roots do not glow, and these did. The water down here was old, colder than the pond above, and it was not empty. Blind fish came at him first, pale and eyeless, hunting by the push of the water alone. Not strong, but many, and if he swatted at all of them at once, he would miss the one that mattered. So he kept his back to a wall, kept his movement small, and let the shell guards take the ones he could not avoid while he worked deeper.
They could not see him. They could only feel him. And moving slow and steady, he gave a blind hunter very little to feel.
It was slow, ugly work, and it was the kind of work he was built for. No crowd to play to down here, no chat to convince, nobody to mock or be mocked by.
Just the cold, the pale glow of roots that should not glow, and him picking his careful path through the dark toward whatever was worth a locked door.
He had never felt less afraid of being last. Down here, last did not exist.
There was only what you could reach and what you could carry back up.
The mud traps were worse because they did not announce themselves.
Stretches of floor that looked solid and were not. Soft, sucking pits that would have taken his leg to the hip and held it while the blind fish came to find out what was thrashing.
Death sense earned its place down there. He could feel the soft floor before his foot found it, the same certain knowing that had shown him the seam in the shell-backed fish.
And then there were the chest shrimp.
Shrimp the size of his hand, each one clutching a little locked chest, scuttling along the base of the far wall toward a crack they meant to vanish into.
The system marked one of them, the lead one, the one whose load read heaviest.
Chest shrimp, loot carriers. They do not fight, they run.
And if they reach their crack, they are gone with whatever they are carrying, and you have lost it.
He did not have time to be careful with that one.
He had spent 2 days learning patience, and the dungeon was about to teach him that patience has an opposite, and you need both.
The marked shrimp broke for the crack the instant his light reached it.
Fast, faster than the spear would ever be.
And the only thing in his kit quick enough to reach it was the one tool he had been cursing for 2 days.
He cast the crooked rod, threw the hook out ahead of the shrimp instead of at it, and let it scuttle straight onto the barb.
The bent point that had failed him on 100 easy fish caught one panicking shrimp at exactly the right angle.
He hauled it in before it knew it was hooked. It came up still clutching its prize, and he took both.
Past the chest shrimp, set into the far wall where the roots grew thickest, was a door.
Not a crack, not a gap in the mud. A door.
Wood, banded with a lock set into it, and a frame built square around it. He put his hand on it, and it was real, solid, and made. The cold that came off it had nothing to do with the water.
Roots had grown over and through it, holding it shut, and the lock at its center wanted a key he did not have. But the thing the lead chest shrimp had been clutching in its claws when he pulled it up was a piece of one.
The system named it as he took it. Root door key fragment.
He did not open the door then. His line was long out. His light had burned down past half. Only a fool spends his last oil on a locked door at the bottom of a dungeon when he can climb back to the sun and come again ready.
He cleared what loot the first layer still held, and he climbed, counting his line back in arm's length by arm's length, until the root light gave way to the light of his own pond.
He pulled himself out onto the rim and breathed open air.
The dungeon paid out properly once he was up.
A basic fishing rod blueprint, a mud brick recipe, 12 late coins, more than he had carried since the world began, a whole depth stone, not a fragment, and the key fragment sitting cold in his back.
He built the basic rod before he did anything else.
And throwing the crooked gacha rod onto the scrap pile was one of the better moments he had out there.
The basic rod was nothing special by any real standard.
To him, after that bent, twisted, miserable starter rod, it was a king's tool.
A straight hook that set when he told it to. A line that would not snap if he breathed near it.
He cast it once into the clear pond, just to feel it work.
And it worked. And he put 2 days of frustration down with that one cast.
The mud brick recipe was the other quiet prize.
He had been patching a fence of soft mud posts that washed half away every time it rained.
Mud bricks fired hard at the bonfire were a wall that lasted.
By dusk, he had a low course of fired brick laid along the weakest stretch of the fence, hard and solid where the soft mud had been.
Standing back to look at it, he could see the shape of what he was building for the first time.
Not a campsite anymore, a holding. Walls, fire, clean water, stored food, a rod that worked, and a dungeon under it. All of it paid out for patience. None of it would have impressed anyone sitting on a lake. All of it together was worth more than any lake. And he was the only one in the region who could see it, because his own appraisal was making sure of that. Then he went back down and fitted the fragment to the root door. The fragment was not a whole key, but the first door did not want a whole key. It wanted enough, and the fragment was enough. He set it into the lock. The roots that had held the door shut drew back, and the door swung in. The cold behind it rolled out over him, thick and old. The room on the other side was full of fishing rods, broken ones, snapped shafts and bent hooks and rotted line. Dozens of them piled and scattered across the floor of a room that should not have existed. And the moment his light fell on them, he understood what was wrong. In his gut, before his head caught up. These rods were old, weathered, worn, the grips rotted soft, the kind of old that takes years. There were no years in this world. The migration was 3 weeks gone.
Nothing down here should have been older than him.
And these rods had been broken and left behind long, long before the system ever pulled him off that train. He crouched and picked one up. The shaft crumbled at the grip the moment his fingers closed on it. The line gone to powder, the hook eaten through with rust.
He set it back down with the care a man gives a thing that belongs to the dead.
And the cold certainty he had been holding off finally landed.
This world was not new. It was only new to them. Something had lived here and fished here, and the depth his puddle was reaching into was not empty wilderness.
It was a place, a made place with doors and rooms and the leavings of whoever had built it, drowned and buried under the grass.
Waiting for 8 billion of them to come dig it back up, one hook at a time. The system put one line into the cold dark over the pile, with no feeling in it at all. Warning, rod eater detected.
Something large shifted in the black water at the far end of the room.
Slow, heavy, patient, and he felt it turn its attention toward the light and toward the new rod on his back.
He backed out of that doorway slow. He did not turn his back on the dark until the root door was shut between him and whatever was waking up in it. The thing at the back of that room was called a rod eater, and he had exactly one rod worth the name. Going in with his only good rod in the dark, half ready, was not courage. It was how he ended up a name in the chat nobody hears from again.
So he climbed back to the surface, banked the fire, slept what little he could, and in the morning got ready to do it right.
A rod eater eats rods. That was the whole problem. And once he had said it plainly to himself, it was also the whole answer. If the thing wanted to bite metal, he would give it metal to bite, just not his basic rod.
He spent the morning building a decoy, a fake rod lashed from a stripped reed and the bent ruin of his old gacha hook, and a few scraps of metal-smelling paste worked up from shell powder and spoiled oil.
Shell guards of both arms. And the thing he was proudest of, because nobody else in the region could have made it yet. A wedge of fired mud brick he carried down in pieces and built into a choke at the narrow mouth of the rod room. A hard corner he could drive the thing against, where it could not turn. He was not calm about it. A thing that ate metal in the dark had been waiting behind a door under his pond since before the world he knew ended, and he was about to walk into its room on purpose. But fear is just information, and the information was useful. It told him to bring a decoy. It told him to build the wedge. It told him to keep his real rod on his back and out of reach until the last possible moment. Then he went in with the decoy in one hand and the basic rod slung safe across his back. It came up out of the black water at the far end, fast for something that big, all jaw and old hunger. It took the decoy exactly as he had hoped. Its mouth closed on the fake rod and crushed it.
He drove it toward the brick wedge. It thrashed and tried to turn, and the hard corner would not let it.
He got the reed spear into the soft place under its jaw and leaned.
And the fight came down to whether the wedge would hold or his arms would give first.
It pushed. He had never felt anything push like that.
A slow, grinding weight, trying to back off the wedge, turn, and bring all of itself around onto him. My boots slid in the muck. The brick groaned. He got his shoulder behind the spear and his feet against the only solid stone he could find. And he stopped thinking about winning and started thinking only about not letting go.
Because the moment he let go was the moment it turned, and the moment it turned, he was finished.
The wedge held. His arms nearly did not.
It was the eel again, the shell-backed fish again. Every fight he had been in out here, the same lesson written one more time in a harder hand.
He was never going to be the strongest thing in the water. He was only ever going to win by making the water small, by taking away the room a stronger thing needed to use its strength, and then outlasting it in the corner he had built.
He pinned the rod eater against the brick until it stopped fighting, and then a while longer, to be sure.
When it finally went still, he sat down in the cold dark with his back against the wedge that had just saved his only rod, and let his hands shake themselves out.
The rod eater paid out like nothing he had killed before.
Its teeth came off it long, curved, harder than any stone he had worked with. A set of spear tips and blades, a season ahead of the sharpened reeds.
A bundle of what the system called reinforced line weed, a fiber he could spin into line that would not snap when the next big thing hit it.
A monster fish core, the biggest yet, warm and heavy in his hand. And 3 blueprints rolled tight and glowing that mattered more than the meat or the metal. A pond fence blueprint, a grip glove blueprint, and a recipe for rod repair oil. He built all 3 the moment he was back in the sun. The repair oil came first. Eel fat rendered down and ground shell powder worked into it, and he rubbed it along the basic rod where the fight had scored it. The small damage closed and the rod came back to true. That oil was its own kind of freedom. A rod had become a thing he could hold on to through a bad fight and bring back after.
The grip gloves went on next. Fish skin and shell stitched into a glove that held a wet line and a wet spear without slipping. After 2 days of losing his grip at the worst moments, they were a second pair of hands. And the pond fence he built up out of the mud bricks he had already started stacking.
A real wall now, around the rim of the clear pond, fired hard and set deep, with rod eater teeth worked into the top of it, pointing out. He took stock that evening, and the count had changed past recognizing.
6 days ago, he had owned a bent hook, 3 lumps of bait, and a hole full of mud.
Now he had a repaired rod he could keep repairing, gloves that held, armor coming together, a wall with teeth, a dungeon that paid, food enough to skip a week of fishing if he had to.
None of it had come from luck.
Every single piece of it had come from taking one dangerous thing at a time and refusing to die to it, then turning what it dropped into the next piece.
That was the whole method, and it was working. He did not know yet how soon the fence would be tested. The grassland was about to tell him.
The first night, beasts came out of the dark grass after midnight.
Low, fast, in numbers pulled across the open plots by the smell of the only good water around.
They came to drink and found a wall and a man between them in it.
The fence earned itself in the first 10 minutes.
The beasts were strong, stronger than him 1 for 1. Claws, weight, a hunger that did not care what he wanted.
But the wall took their charge, and the rod-eater teeth along the top of it turned them, and it funneled them to the one gap he had left.
The narrow place where he stood with the spear.
A wall does the same thing for a weak man that a dungeon corner does. It takes away the room. It makes the fight happen where he chooses it. One beast at a time, in a gap barely wide enough for one, instead of all of them on him at once in the open, where their numbers and strength would have ended him in a breath.
He held the gap. The grip gloves held his spear.
The rod-eater teeth on his spear went through hide that his old reed points would have skidded off. They kept coming in waves, a lull, then another rush.
He lost count of how many times he set his feet in that gap. Twice a beast got a paw over the wall, and he had to leave the gap to put it down before it dropped inside.
And both times he got back to the gap a half second before the next one came through. A half second was all the room there was between holding the pond and losing it.
It was a long, ugly, exhausting night, and he took cuts he would feel for days.
But the fire at his back kept him from going blind in the dark.
And the long, ugly habit he had built over 4 days of staying calm, picking the one thing in front of him, dealing with it before he looked at the next, kept him alive when being stronger never could have.
By the gray of the morning, the beast still alive had given up on his water and gone looking for an easier throat to cut.
They paid for the night too. Claw bones hard and useful, a pile of tough hide, better than anything he had worked with.
He cured the hide at the fire and stitched it into a vest. Fish skin and beast hide layered over the chest, with heavier shell plates set into the forearms.
When he put it on, he was wearing real armor for the first time since the world began. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, the system moved a number it had not moved for him before.
Survival rank, rising.
Not the source rank. That one the appraisal still held at dead last, still selling the worm farmer's story to every scan, exactly as he wanted it to.
But survival rank was a different measure, the system's count of how likely a given survivor would still be breathing in a week.
And his had spent the whole migration scraping the bottom. Now it climbed, and it climbed hard.
Because he had crossed every line the welcome had drawn on the first day.
Shelter, fire, clean water, stored food, a rod that worked, and now a wall that had just turned back a night that would have killed most lake owners in the open. He was not surviving anymore. He was dug in.
And that was the moment Kang Teao finally decided the worm farmer was worth coming for himself. His first move was almost polite. A formal offer came through the market, system stamped, real coin behind it.
More coin than a puddle owner ranked dead last had any business being offered.
Kang Teao wished to purchase his water source. He framed it as a kindness, a way out for a man clearly in over his head.
He refused the offer without a word of explanation. Because nobody puts real coin on the table for a thing he believes is worthless.
And the size of Teao's offer told him more about what his puddle was worth than any scan ever had.
When polite did not work, Teao went back to the only other tool he had, his mouth, and the size of the crowd that listened to it.
The cursed water story came back louder this time, and organized.
He spent the coin he had been saving and bought the one thing that ends a lie like that for good.
A market verification token.
The system itself tested his water in the open, where anyone could read the result, and stamped it clean. Not the worm farmer's word against Taio's, the system's word, which no rumor can shout down.
He sold verified clean water after that, verified dried food, rod repair oil that every survivor with a single good rod suddenly understood they needed.
All of it stamped true by the only authority in this world that does not lie.
The cursed water story did not just fail. It made the people who had repeated it look like fools, and it made him the one honest seller in a market full of noise.
And Teao had paid for that result himself. One by one, the voices that had echoed the lie went quiet, and some of them started buying his verified water instead. He sold it to them at the same fair price as everyone else. He was not in the business of punishing people for being afraid. He was in the business of being the one they came back to once they stopped.
Then Teao sent 5 men through the gap in his fence, in the dark, carrying the decoy box story, confident they were robbing someone weaker than they were.
They moved toward the tent and the decoy box sitting in plain sight, exactly as he had planned.
And the gap in his fence stopped being a way in and became the worst place on his whole plot to stand.
Fish oil poured thick across the slope, mud pits under a thin crust of dry dirt, hook lines strung low across the dark. Shell powder, fine and sharp, worked into the oil.
The first two raiders went down hard, slid, could not get their feet under them. A third man put his leg into a pit to the hip and stuck fast and started shouting.
He did not have to beat 5 men in a fair fight, and he would have lost a fair fight.
He gave them a field of his own making in the dark and picked them off the ground, one sliding, bleeding man at a time.
4 of them dragged themselves back out through the gap they had come in, leaving blood and the fake box behind.
The 5th one the mud pit had caught, stuck to the hip and going nowhere.
He put the captured raider to the system's forced confession protocol, logged in the same public record that tracked every trade and item.
King Teao had sent them, not to harass or scare, to assess.
He had sent 5 men to find out exactly what was inside the fence, what gear, what stores, what the puddle was really worth.
Because he had watched too many rare drops come up out of dead last water and stopped believing the worm farmer story. The raid was not an attack. It was an appraisal.
He let the captured raider go once the confession was logged, because a freed man carries the story back better than a held one. And he wanted Teao to know his assessment had been assessed right back.
The disguise had bought him everything he had built, but it would not buy him much longer. The time his appraisal could keep hiding him was running out, and he had felt it run out in a confession forced out of a man stuck to his hip in his own mud.
He stood in his trap field in the dark, with 4 men's blood drying in the oil, and one truth made plain.
Kang Teao was coming back, not with 5 men testing a fence.
With everything he had. And the worm farmer, dead last from the beginning, was going to be ready.